Have you ever felt something strange? Like the more you try to hold on to someone, the faster they slip away from you? Like the more love you give, the colder they become? And now you're stuck in that painful space, wondering why your avoidant ex seems so unaffected, while you are the one carrying all the memories, all the questions, all the weight. What if I told you it's not because they don't care? What if the truth is they feel it too, but their mind works in a completely different way? And what if, without chasing them, without begging, without losing your self-respect, you could make them feel your absence so deeply that it starts to disturb their peace? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to understand is not common advice. This is psychological. This is powerful. And once you see it clearly, you will never approach love the same way again. Right now, you're probably thinking, if they really cared, they wouldn't have left. That thought hurts. It feels logical, it feels real, but here's where most people get it wrong, especially when it comes to avoidant personalities. Avoidant people are not like you. They don't process emotions the way you do. When things get intense, when emotions get deep, when connection starts to feel real, something inside them doesn't feel safe. It feels overwhelming. It feels like losing control. And instead of leaning in, they pull away. Not because you weren't enough, but because it was too much for their emotional system. And this is where your pain begins, because your instinct is to move closer when you feel distance. You want to fix it. You want to talk. You want to understand. You want to hold on tighter. But every step you take forward feels like pressure to them, and pressure is exactly what makes them run faster. So what do most people do? They chase. They send long messages. They explain their feelings. They try to prove their love. They show up again and again, hoping that one day the avoidant person will finally understand. But here's the brutal truth. The more you chase, the less they feel you. Read that again, because this is not just advice, this is psychology. When you chase an avoidant, you remove the very thing that creates emotional impact, which is your absence. You make yourself available, predictable, always there, and in doing that, you slowly erase the emotional tension that makes someone miss you. And without that tension, there is no longing. Without longing, there is no emotional pull. And without emotional pull, they feel free, not connected. This is why they seem fine after the breakup. This is why it feels like they moved on so easily. But what you don't see is what happens when silence enters the space. Avoidants don't process emotions in the moment. They suppress, they distract, they move away. But emotions don't disappear, they just get delayed. And when you finally stop chasing, when your energy disappears, when your presence is no longer there to comfort them, that's when something shifts. That's when the silence starts to speak. That's when your absence becomes louder than your words ever were. But here's the problem. Most people never reach that stage because they break. They can't handle the silence. They can't handle not knowing. They feel like doing nothing means losing everything. So they go back. They text again. They check again. They reopen the wound again and again. And in doing that, they reset the entire process. They give the avoidant exactly what they want, space without consequence. You see, an avoidant only starts to feel the loss when the space they created becomes real, not when you're waiting for them, not when you're emotionally available in the background, but when they feel that you are truly gone. And that is terrifying for them, even if they don't show it. Because deep down, avoidants do crave connection. They just fear it at the same time. So they live in this constant conflict and wanting closeness, but running from it when it appears. And the only thing that forces them to confront that conflict is your absence. Not your words, not your explanations, not your love, your absence. This is the shift you need to understand, because right now you are trying to be felt through presence, but with an avoidant, impact is created through distance. And I know that sounds painful. It feels like giving up. It feels like losing control. But in reality, it's the only way to regain your power, because the moment you stop chasing, you stop feeding their escape. The moment you step back, you give space for their mind to come back to you. And the moment your energy is no longer available, you become something they can finally feel again, not as pressure, not as expectation, but as loss. And loss is what creates missing, not love alone. Not memories alone, but the realization that something once there is no longer within reach. So before you do anything else, before you send that message, before you try one more time to explain yourself, ask yourself this: are you trying to make them understand you, or are you trying to make them feel you? Because those are two very different paths. And only one of them actually works on an avoidant. In the next part, you'll discover the exact shift in behavior that flips their psychology, the one move that quietly builds emotional pressure inside them, without you saying a single word. And when you understand it, you won't just want them back. You'll finally understand your own worth. Now here is where everything begins to change, because once you stop trying to force their attention, you enter the only zone where an avoidant mind can no longer hide from what it feels. And that zone is not built through effort. It is built through emotional stillness. This is the part most people fail to understand. They think attraction is created by doing more. They think reconnection comes from saying the perfect thing, posting the perfect photo, or finding one last excuse to reach out. But the truth is far more uncomfortable and far more powerful. What makes your avoidant ex miss you is not your performance. It is your emotional withdrawal from the cycle they were depending on. Because whether you realize it or not, every relationship creates a pattern, even unhealthy ones, even painful ones. And in many avoidant dynamics, the pattern becomes simple. They pull away and you come closer. They become distant and you become more available. They shut down and you become more emotional, more patient, more understanding, more willing to keep the connection alive by yourself. At first you call that love, but over time it becomes a trap. Because when one person keeps reaching no matter what, the other person never has to feel the true weight of what they are doing. They get to leave without losing. They get to disconnect without consequence. They get to keep your energy without having to offer their own. And that is exactly why the second section of this journey is so important. Because the move that starts to disturb an avoidant ex is this: you break the pattern completely. You stop being emotionally available in the way they became comfortable with. Not to punish them, not to play games, but to end the version of you that kept abandoning yourself just to stay connected to someone who could not meet you where you stood. This is where your power begins. Because patterns are deeply psychological. The human mind gets attached not only to people, but to emotional routines. If someone has grown used to your constant presence, your constant care, your constant emotional access, they may not appreciate it while it is there. But the moment that access disappears, the brain notices the absence immediately. Not because they are suddenly transformed into a different person, but because their nervous system feels the interruption. Something familiar is gone. Something they thought would always be there is no longer feeding the old dynamic. And that is where emotional awareness begins to rise. But listen carefully. This only works if your silence is real, not fake distance, not silence filled with hidden hope, not pretending to move on while secretly checking every story, every status, every sign. Because avoidants are often more emotionally perceptive than people think. They may act detached, but they can feel when your energy is still attached to them. They can sense when you are gone physically, but still available emotionally. And as long as they feel you waiting, they do not have to confront the emptiness of losing you. That is why this step is not just about cutting contact. It is about cutting emotional access. That means no indirect reaching, no posting for their attention, no trying to trigger guilt, no silent performance meant to make them wonder. Because the strongest shift is not, look what you lost. The strongest shift is, you no longer have access to the version of me that kept choosing pain over peace. That energy is different. That energy hits deeper. That energy creates confusion in the mind of someone who thought you would always stay in orbit around them. And this is where human psychology becomes very clear. People often do not feel the value of something when it is constantly available. The mind adapts. It becomes used to it. It stops noticing what it no longer has to work for. This is not always because someone is cruel. Sometimes it is simply because comfort creates blindness. Familiarity can numb appreciation. And when an avoidant has been allowed to keep you emotionally close while remaining emotionally distant, they begin to believe, without even saying it, that no matter how far they drift, you will still be there. That belief must break, not through anger, through dignity. Because when that belief breaks, Something happens inside them that they cannot immediately explain. Their old emotional map stops working. They look for your reaction, and it is not there. They expect your softness, and it is no longer being handed over. They expect your emotional door to stay open, and suddenly it feels closed, not with bitterness, but with self-respect. And that kind of closure shakes people in a way begging never could. Why? Because nothing forces reflection faster than losing access to what once made someone feel safe without requiring effort. And yes, even avoidance feels safety in your presence, even if they struggle to stay close to it. That is the contradiction. They may resist deep intimacy, but they still become attached to the emotional comfort you gave them. They may not know how to hold love properly, but they still notice when the source of warmth disappears. And when it does, they begin to revisit what they were too defended to feel in the moment. This is when memory starts doing its work. Not your message, not your explanation. Memory. And memory is powerful because it is selective. It does not replay every painful detail the way your wounded heart does. It often brings back the feeling of your energy, the way you made things softer, the way your presence became part of their emotional environment, the way your consistency became something they quietly leaned on without fully admitting it. Once that is gone, their mind starts connecting dots it ignored before. But again, this does not happen in one day. This is why emotional maturity matters so much here. Because the person who wins in this situation is not the one who gets the fastest reaction. It is the one who has enough discipline to stop interfering with the process. That is hard, especially when you are hurting, especially when your heart wants proof, especially when silence makes you feel forgotten. But growth often begins in the place where your ego feels most uncomfortable. And this is one of those places. You are not being weak by stepping back. You are becoming unchaseable in the most powerful way possible. Not because you are cold, because you are no longer willing to keep proving your value to someone who could only feel it after losing access to it. That is not bitterness. That is awakening. And if they are ever going to miss you in a way that reaches their chest, it will not come from your effort. It will come from the moment they realize the emotional supply they kept taking for granted is no longer available on demand. That realization is where longing begins. And in the next part, we are going deeper into the one mistake that destroys this entire process for almost everyone. The hidden behavior that keeps an avoidant emotionally protected instead of emotionally affected. But this is the point where most people ruin everything. Not because they do not care enough, but because they care in the wrong direction. They finally step back. They finally stop reaching. They finally create a little space. And then the pain starts talking. The fear gets louder. The mind begins to whisper dangerous things like, what if they forget me? What if they think I never cared? What if I lose them forever because I stayed quiet too long? And in that emotional storm, they break the very pressure that was beginning to work. This is the hidden behavior that destroys your impact. Emotional leaking, not direct chasing only. That is too obvious. Emotional leaking is more subtle, more common, and far more damaging than people realize. It is when your body is silent, but your energy is still screaming after them. It is when you stop texting, but you start posting with hidden meaning. It is when you disappear from their inbox, but remain trapped in their digital world, watching, checking, reacting, hoping, waiting, leaving little emotional fingerprints everywhere. It is when you say, I'm done, but deep inside, your entire nervous system is still turned toward them. And avoidants feel that, not always consciously, not always in words, but they feel when your center still belongs to them. That is why the next shift is not just external, it is internal. Because if your silence is filled with obsession, then it is not distance. It is attachment in disguise. And attachment in disguise does not create absence. It creates invisible availability. This is where human psychology becomes brutal. People do not just respond to what you do. They respond to the emotional position you hold. If your inner world is still begging for their attention, your outer actions lose power. Why? Because energy always leaks through behavior, through timing, through patterns, through what you choose to post, what you choose to view, what you choose to leave behind. Even small things reveal whether someone has truly stepped back or is just waiting to be noticed. And the moment your avoidant ex senses that you are still emotionally standing outside the door, they feel less urgency to open it. Because urgency is not created when someone is still available. Urgency is created when access feels uncertain. This is why so many people say, "I did no contact and it didn't work." But what they really did was physical silence with emotional attachment. They disappeared in form, but not in energy. They were still orbiting, still reacting internally, still shaping their life around whether the avoidant noticed them or not. That is not freedom. That is emotional dependence wearing a stronger outfit. And if you want someone like this to miss you deeply, then you must understand something painful but necessary. You cannot be focused on being missed. Read that carefully, because the moment your entire healing becomes about whether they return, you are no longer reclaiming your power. You are still handing it away, just in a quieter way. This section matters because this is where real transformation begins. Not when they text you, not when they suddenly become curious, not when they start watching from a distance. Your real transformation begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by their emotional movement, because until that happens, your healing is still hostage, and avoidants often return to what still feels emotionally open. That is why you must become emotionally grounded, not emotionally waiting. There is a difference. Waiting says, "I hope they finally see my value." Grounded says, "My value is no longer up for negotiation." Waiting says, "Maybe if I stay calm long enough, they'll come back." Grounded says, "If they ever return, they return to a version of me that no longer accepts confusion as love." That shift changes everything, because once you stop trying to produce a reaction, your energy becomes clean. There is no manipulation in it. There is no performance in it. There is no hidden desperation buried under fake confidence. There is only one truth. You are no longer emotionally available to chaos. And that truth is magnetic, not only to them, to life itself. Because the moment you stop leaking your energy into someone who keeps running from closeness, you begin to collect yourself again. Your mind gets clearer, your body gets calmer, your emotions stop spinning in circles. You start noticing how much of your peace was being drained by trying to be understood by someone who was emotionally unavailable. And that realization hurts, but it also wakes you up. Because once you see how much of your soul has been trapped in one person's inconsistency, you begin to ask a different question. Not, "How do I make them miss me?" but, "Why was I willing to lose myself just to keep being remembered by someone who could not hold me properly?" That question is powerful, because that question is the beginning of self-respect. And self-respect is the one thing that changes your emotional frequency completely. When you begin to respect yourself again, your actions become cleaner. You stop doing things that betray your own healing. You stop checking for signs every hour. You stop creating stories in your head from breadcrumbs. You stop turning every silence into a test of your worth. You stop treating uncertainty like romance, and most importantly, you stop giving people unlimited access to your heart while they offer limited presence in return. That is where your strength comes back. And ironically, that is also where they begin to feel the shift more strongly, because people can sense when they no longer have emotional control over you. And for an avoidant, that can be deeply unsettling. Why? Because many of them are used to distance keeping them safe. They are used to knowing that even if they disappear, your emotions will still be there. Your care will still be there. Your attachment will still be there, waiting to reconnect the moment they choose. But when that emotional safety net disappears, when they can no longer assume your heart is still hanging in the same place, something changes in their nervous system. Now they are not managing your closeness. Now they are confronting your absence. And those are two completely different emotional experiences. One allows escape, the other creates reflection. So if you truly want to create the kind of silence that gets under their skin, then do not just remove your words. Remove your emotional availability. Not with hate, not with pride, with peace. Because peace is what tells the world, "I no longer chase what cannot meet me." And once that peace becomes real, you stop needing instant outcomes. You stop acting from panic. You stop interrupting the very process that could have finally made them feel what your constant presence never could. In the next part, we are going into something even deeper, the exact emotional wound inside avoidance that makes your calm detachment hit harder than love, effort, or loyalty ever did. Now we arrive at the part almost nobody talks about, the wound underneath the distance. Because if you do not understand what is happening inside an avoidant person at the emotional level, you will keep taking their behavior personally. You will keep thinking their coldness means you meant nothing. You will keep assuming their silence is proof that they never cared. And that misunderstanding can destroy you from the inside. So let's go deeper, because this is where your mind finally stops chasing fantasy and starts seeing truth. An avoidant does not only fear losing people, they fear what closeness does to them. That is the hidden pain. Most people think love should naturally make someone feel safe, but for an avoidant, closeness often activates the opposite. It can stir discomfort, pressure, responsibility, vulnerability, and a deep loss of internal control. What feels intimate to you can feel emotionally dangerous to them. Not because love is wrong, but because their nervous system learned long ago that depending on people comes with risk. And when a human being grows up learning that emotional needs are unsafe, inconvenient, ignored, or overwhelming, they do not stop having needs. They just learn to bury them. That is what creates the avoidant pattern. From the outside, it looks like independence. From the inside, it is often self-protection. They become the kind of person who survives by staying in control of their feelings, minimizing their needs, and keeping enough distance so nobody can truly affect them too deeply. That is why they can seem calm when things end. That is why they can look emotionally untouched. That is why their face can say, "I'm fine," while something much older inside them is still running the same defense system it has used for years. And this is where your calm detachment becomes so powerful, because when you stop over-explaining, overreaching, over-offering, and over-functioning emotionally, you are no longer feeding the part of them that knows how to avoid discomfort. You are no longer giving them something to push against. You are no longer helping them stay numb through distance. Now they are left alone with themselves. And that is not a small thing, because the one place avoidants often struggle the most is not in leaving. It is in feeling. The real challenge begins when there is no distraction, no emotional chase, no external pressure to blame, no conflict to escape, and no constant reassurance waiting in the background. That is when the inner noise begins. That is when the mind starts revisiting things it was too defended to process before. That is when memories stop feeling like simple moments and start feeling like emotional evidence. And the reason your steadiness hits harder than your pursuit ever did is simple. Your pursuit gave them something familiar. Your steadiness gives them something unfamiliar, a mirror that silently says, "I am no longer carrying both sides of this connection." And that mirror is deeply uncomfortable for someone who has spent years protecting themselves from emotional accountability, because now they cannot hide behind your intensity. They cannot say, "It was too much." They cannot point to your emotional reactions as the reason they withdrew. They cannot use your closeness as the excuse for their distance. Now the silence places them face to face with one painful possibility, that maybe the connection was not the problem. Maybe their fear was. That realization can shake a person more than any message ever could. But here is where you need emotional maturity, because once you understand this, you must not turn it into sympathy that pulls you backward. You must not use this knowledge to excuse everything they did. You must not start saying, "They are just wounded, so I should keep waiting." No. Understanding someone's pain should give you clarity, not permission to abandon yourself all over again. That distinction matters. Because yes, avoidants often carry unhealed wounds. Yes, they may have learned to disconnect in order to survive emotionally. Yes, they may care more deeply than they show. But none of that changes one brutal truth. If their wound keeps hurting you, your job is not to stay and bleed for their healing. Your job is to stop standing where the wound keeps reaching you. That is strength. That is self-respect. That is what changes your energy from desperate to unshakable. And the deeper truth is this: people often only feel the cost of their defenses when those defenses finally cost them something real. Let that sink in. As long as avoidance helps them stay comfortable, they keep using it. As long as emotional distance still gives them access to your love, your patience, your understanding, and your loyalty, there is no reason for change. But the moment those defenses create actual loss, the moment the person who kept showing up is no longer there in the same way, the old pattern stops feeling safe. Now it feels expensive. Now it hurts. Now it forces awareness. That is why your emotional composure is not passive. It is disruptive. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply disruptive, because you are no longer participating in the pattern that protected them from their own emotional reality. And once that pattern breaks, many avoidants begin to feel something they have spent years outrunning: grief. Not always dramatic grief, not always obvious grief, but a quiet ache, a strange emptiness, a discomfort they cannot easily explain, a feeling that something important is missing from the emotional structure of their life. And here is the part people rarely understand. Avoidants often do not miss you in the same timeline you miss them. Your pain may come first. Theirs often comes later. That delay confuses many people. It makes them think nothing is happening. It makes them panic. It makes them assume the silence means the story is over. But sometimes silence is not the absence of emotion. Sometimes it is the place where delayed emotion is slowly catching up. And that is exactly why you must stop interrupting the process. Every time you rush in because you are afraid of being forgotten, you save them from the very emotional confrontation that might have finally awakened something real inside them. Every time you reappear too soon, you reduce the weight of your absence. Every time you soothe the discomfort they created, you teach them that they can avoid hard feelings and still keep your energy nearby. That is not love. That is self-erasure. And if you are serious about changing this dynamic, then you have to become strong enough to let them feel what your constant rescue used to prevent. Not to hurt them, to stop hurting yourself. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop protecting someone from the consequences of how they handle connection. That is not cruelty. That is emotional truth. And when you begin to live from that truth, something powerful happens inside you. You stop seeing their distance as proof of your inadequacy. You stop making their inconsistency mean you were not valuable enough. You stop trying to earn what should have been given freely, and in that moment, you begin to rise above the very dynamic that once kept you emotionally trapped. That is when your energy changes completely. That is when you stop being the person who waits and start becoming the person who no longer breaks themselves trying to be chosen. In the next part, we are going to uncover the one inner shift that changes your entire presence after a breakup. The mindset that makes an avoidant feel your absence not just emotionally, but psychologically.